Welcome back to the show where we run you through all the Dolphins news you need to know about. After we run you through the news you need to know about, we run you through the fan Q&A where we answer fans' questions. Obviously, we have a ton of stuff to talk about. I'm going to get some of the smaller stuff out of the way first. Some updates here, some updates there, some things that we might have skipped in later episodes or past episodes that I kind of want to touch on really quickly. One of the first things I want to touch on is there's been no update on the Lawrence Guy situation, which I'm monitoring. I hope that the Dolphins end up making that move. I think, especially for a lot of these stories that we're going to cover today, I think a lot of them are going to get resolved after the draft because it is getting so much closer that I think, and we hear this every year, but it's true. I mean, it literally happens every single year. A lot of teams wait till after the draft to fill holes with some lower name veteran guys in free agency that maybe they missed out on in the draft. You know, maybe they'll have a Lawrence Guy higher on their board than some of the other defensive tackles that are available in the draft if they don't get the guy that they want. So I imagine some of these other guys will get signed after the draft, whether it's to the Dolphins or other teams. And I think Lawrence Guy falls into that category, and we'll have to kind of wait to see. That's why in the offseason, really until training camp and some of the OTA stuff starts, that's when you kind of get the full picture of the offseason and how well the team did. Because it's still, super early. I think all of us are very excited with what the team has done so far, though. But I think, like I said, for some of these lower name guys, we're going to have to wait a little while, but that's all right. It sucks to wait a lot. The worst thing about sports, especially if you're a hardcore fan, is obviously waiting for the season to start again, but just a lot of, the rumors nowadays, more than ever, especially since a lot of these sports networks have to, fill airtime, it's so much, and you can go through an entire week wanting one player and then obviously go somewhere else, but the rumor mill is it's crazier than it's ever been. And so for some of these other smaller stories, I want to touch on this very quickly. Obviously, Carson, the situation, we didn't talk about this last week, but I kind of wanted to talk about this in previous weeks, forgot about it. He was rumored to go to the Dolphins for this is what I'm talking about with the rumor mill stuff and how much fake stuff is out there. Carson was rumored to sign with the Dolphins. Obviously, he ends up going back to Seattle, but it's interesting to see that the Dolphins haven't necessarily really addressed that position yet. And like I said, I think that's another position we will have to wait for, obviously, because Philip Lindsay went to Houston. There's not a lot of options left, but obviously I think that's definitely going to be a high, I don't know the word I'm looking for. It's going to be obviously a goal of the organization to get at least a running back in the draft. And we'll see how high profile that guy will be. If he'll be maybe they try back up into the first to get one, or they use one with the 18th pick. Whatever they decide to do, I think that's another position we're going to have to wait till after the draft for. I just wanted to bring that up because it is a huge, one of the bigger needs on the team that should at least be addressed in the first 3 rounds. Whether it's someone from North Carolina or obviously ETN or Najee Harris, who's one of my favorite players in the draft. So hopefully it's Najee Harris, though. That would be awesome. Moving on from that, this is a very interesting story. So if you've been paying attention to the rumor mill, and I'm talking deep cuts here, ladies and gentlemen, you got to be invested. You got to check the Pro Football Rumors page a lot for this one. But Clowney has been connected to the Dolphins in recent weeks. Nothing substantial, but he has been connected. Obviously, he's been heavily connected to the Cleveland Browns. But the report said, in this report comes from Pro Football Rumors, they say that they have a higher chance of getting this deal done than they did, I think, what was it, a year ago? I think it was a year ago that Clowney turned down the deal from Miami, and then he ended up taking a 1-year deal with Tennessee, I believe. Which was kind of a bad move on his part. Obviously, things didn't work out the way he wanted to. Obviously, played very injured. But at the end of the day, it ended up working out for the Dolphins. I mean, this is a guy that I don't think, first of all, we're not worried about him getting, we're necessarily relying on him to be like a 14, 12, 10 sack guy. He really just is, again, fits the scheme to a T. He ran the scheme in Houston with, obviously, Romeo Crennel. similar schemes. They're obviously different. One's more complex than the other. The Houston scheme was a little bit more simple, but he's what he's asked to do as an outside player is exactly what he did in Houston. Is just wreak havoc, and he's so good at it, and he can really help us in the physical department in terms of physicality, and his run defense, I think, is like what he does best. Is just really you're gonna have a very hard time running against a player like him on a consistent basis, and that's a huge advantage for a team. A huge advantage for a team. It really helps your front. It could really help this defense. Obviously, one of the bigger weaknesses of the team was being a little bit more consistent defensively with the run defense, and that's one of the reasons why their yards was a little bit higher than some other defenses around the league. Obviously, they bend but they didn't break all year, and they were very good defense. But the run defense left a little bit to be desired, and I think Clowney coming in could really help that, and he wouldn't be that expensive, depending on how much Cleveland likes him, I would say. Maybe they could overpay him a little bit to make sure they secure his services, but for the most part, I feel like Clowney would be a very good signing. And his pressures, if you look at the stats, are pretty good when he's healthy. I just think the best thing that he does is make teams one-dimensional defensively. And we have a lot of those guys on this team right now, like I keep saying Whitney Merciless. Bernardrick McKinney, who's probably the best thing that he does is get off blocks. I mean, whether that's in the passing game or the run game, he's really good at it. And adding those two to the team really, not only from a physical standpoint, physically, and when I say physical, I mean tough, physical, hard-hitting type of a defense, upgrades that department as well. Like, McKinney is a physical player. Same thing with Clowney. So I think from a run defense perspective, and you hear Omar Kelly and some of these other guys complain about, well, the scheme doesn't really lend itself to play run defense. But if you get players like Clowney, like McKinney, even like Kyle Van Noy when he's playing his best football, it allows you to do that. It allows you to play that scheme and still be a very good run defense. With players like that, and the Lawrence guy, and players like that, who are in Dante Hightower and some of the classic names in that New England defense, where you can put extra defensive backs on the field, lighten the box a little bit, and these guys can hold their own because they're so good at it. And Clowney is one of those guys. So, like I said, some of the beat writers who have criticized the defense because it doesn't really lend itself to run defense necessarily, unless, and again, we're a multiple front. Brian Flores isn't stupid. He has changed the lineups to whatever the team is doing. I'm not saying that, but mainly he wants, just like New England, as many defensive backs on the field as he can, really play that man coverage and take a lot of things away in the passing game. And he can do that more if he has players like McKinney and like Clowney. Allows him to do what he wants to do a lot more, is basically what I'm saying. I don't know, I'm running out of breath. But, I think, like I said, you'd be a great scheme fit. Didn't mean to spend that much time on Clowney, but I would really love the signing. And I think it would help the defense out a lot. And not even just in the run game, which I think, honestly, if we added Clowney, and obviously we'll get into that here in a sec. You know what? We'll throw that in here. The Dolphins have re-signed Landon Roberts, which is another great thing for run defense. And for some reason, I would love to know, as if we did like a fan poll, what the feeling of him would be. Because you watch people talk about Landon Roberts, he's like, he was kind of a liability. He was not a liability. Like, his pass defense, first of all, he wasn't on the field that much when it came to third downs, obviously. He was a thumper. But he did his job so well. Think about all the big plays he made defensively throughout the season. There were so many game-breaking, game-changing plays. One of his most underrated games was against the 49ers, where he was not only great in the run game, because the Niners love to run the football. He was outstanding in that game, in the run game. But he was amazing at blitzing. Like, amazing. And again, that's something that Brian likes to do, is blitz and get creative up front. And that goes back to Clowney. and McKinney, and obviously getting a Landon back, all through and Jerome Baker, all of those guys are elite at blitzing, and they're so athletic that when you move people up front and you do all that crazy stuff with the amoeba defense and stuff like that, it wreaks havoc because of their super strong and athletic and fast, that it just creates havoc up front. And I think getting a Landon back helps that and helps the run defense. If you add Clowney, maybe you bring in someone like a Lawrence guy who is a traditional run defense type of a nose tackle, and that's what he does best. I just feel like this defense looks a lot better than it did a year ago, in my opinion. And I know a lot of people may not necessarily like the depth at the linebacker position, but when I look at the team and I look at the roster, I do think this defense is getting better than it was a year ago. I really do. I just, if I had to trade off, and obviously McKinney has to stay healthy, but he's been healthy his entire career. I just like this roster and where defensively I think it is getting better. With the signing of Justin Coleman and Adam Butler and some of those players. And if the Dolphins get Clowney, like I said, I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that they would still be as good as they were a year ago, and I think they would be better. And I do think they would be easily a top 10 defense. So I hope that happens. It's basically what I'm saying. I hope these news stories, I hope there's truth to them, number one, because we talked about earlier in the show how that kind of, it's a little bit murky when it comes to that kind of stuff, but I hope this is true. And they've had connections in the past. Chris Greer has really some insane connections to Houston. I mean, we've seen that the last few off seasons now. He does obviously have a relationship with someone in that organization. So he's got ties to Clowney when it comes to that. Obviously Clowney was in Houston for a while, so his type of player played in a New England-like system, so there's a lot of obviously they dealt with him in the past when he was in Houston. Almost got him to Miami in a trade, I believe. Obviously that didn't go through. So I'm hopefully this goes through. I hope finally the Dolphins do end up acquiring him. He is such a good player when he's healthy. And again, I don't think his contract would be something too crazy. So we'll see. We'll see what the Dolphins end up doing. I lost my train of thought talking about all that stuff. We talked about Landon coming back, and I do think that is good for the team. Let's get into this news story. This is another quick one before we get into the big topic of the day. Obviously, is the trade. This comes from Pro Football Rumors. Dolphins won't draft Tua's replacement. Again, this comes from Pro Football Rumors. Before sexual abuse lawsuits were filed against Deshaun Watson, the Dolphins were among the favorites to land the Texans single collar. If Houston actually agreed to trade him. If that happened, then Miami's own quarterback Tua would either be in Houston or as a part of the trade return or playing second fiddle to Watson on the Dolphins bench. Let's see here. We don't care about that. But as Armando Salguero of the... Excuse me, I didn't mean to hit the mic. But as Armando Salguero of the Miami Herald writes, the Dolphins will not draft Tua's replacement in this year's draft. Salguero says the consensus in the scouting community is that the club is not looking to draft a quarterback with the number 3 overall pick, and that Miami might even trade down from that selection in order to accumulate even more draft capital. So that last part was true. The last part of that story is true. The Dolphins obviously did end up trading down, and we're going to get into that here in a second, but I think for all of us here wondering if the Dolphins would draft someone with even the 6th overall pick, we'll get into that here in a second. I was about to go on a completely different thread on that. But let's stay on this thread. The Tua thread. I think this is comforting to know that this team is going to give him a chance and he's going to build around him. Because one of the things that you hear with, even if it is a little bit irrational, when people would rather go with Tua with Deshaun Watson, one of the things that I do agree with those people on is that you at least got to give this dude a chance. Obviously, his skill positions weren't great last year. We all know that. They were below average, especially the last month of the season where it was really bad. I think it's a great move by the organization to, and this is something that I wanted this offseason is to be conscious about that and actually put weapons around him. Because this game is becoming more offensive heavy. It has over the last 5 years. It continues to get worse every single year. I mean, historically, this was the worst start defensively to any season, this previous season. And it just continues to go in that direction. And I think you have to surround your young quarterbacks with as much talent, and this draft sets itself up for that. I mean, to me, this draft is more offensive heavy. When you look at some of, especially in the top 10, when you look at the top premium guys in this draft, to me, all the best players are offensive players. If I did an entire top 10 of players, maybe Caleb Farley would make it. I don't think Michael Parsons would make it. Surtain, there's good players there. But to me, when you're talking about the premium guys, people use the term blue chip guys. Those guys, to me, are the receiver, the skill position players, in my opinion. And again, I don't want to repeat myself this many times, but it's true. The thing that I would like to see it to accomplish in this off season more than anything is getting Tua as much help as possible. And again, I still disagree with it strongly on the Penei Sewell pick. That could still happen, and I wouldn't be so upset about it. But to me, I think the skill position players, especially, if you watch it, they're the best players in this draft. Devontae Smith, Jamar Chase, and I'm not just talking about college numbers. If you guys actually just watch them play, they're special. They're special players. And I think they're better than those players, and they fit a need. And it's great that the Dolphins are going to focus on Tua. And especially with this report and some of the other reports that we've heard about from NBC Sports and all that, ESPN, things that we've been hearing from the Dolphins organization is that is the goal of trading back up to 6 with Philly, is to secure someone for Tua. And again, that could be Penei Sewell, but I still disagree with the whole, and I'm not going to get into it. I still think the guys that we drafted in the first and second round last year can become good players in this league. And I don't think you got to double down on that, in my opinion. They were rookies, okay? And I think they will be, like they did at the end of the year last year. They were definitely getting better in the run game. That was obvious. And I think they were really good in the pass game, better than I thought they would be all year. And the numbers do support that. But anyway, I don't want to get into that. I'm not going to get into that. I just disagree with that opinion. And again, my opinion of the draft is I hope the Dolphins, and just in my opinion, I hope they do get someone like Jamar Chase or Kyle Pitts. And it's good to hear that from this draft. Some of the stuff that we're hearing, it looks like that's the direction the Fins are going to go in. And that at least makes me happy. I know there's obviously a lot of guys that like Sewell a lot and some of those players, but some of the there's obviously the top 2 tackles in this draft, and I wouldn't be upset if that's what the Dolphins ended up doing. But there's a lot of skill position guys that I really, really like in this draft. And I just hope the Dolphins secure one of the top 3, which is obviously, in terms of pass catchers at least, Chase, Pitts, and Smith. And it looks like that's the direction they're going in from at least some of the rumors that we're hearing and the reports. And I'm very excited about that. And basically what I was saying with this report, that the Dolphins won't, and again, that came from Pro Football Rumors, that report, the Dolphins won't draft Tagovailoa's replacement, is they are actively, they're going in all on Tua. And I'm very excited about that, and very excited about the players in this draft. And one thing I want to say before we move on, it's not like Tua had an all-star team offensively last year. He had a below-average receiving core last year, especially the last month of the season. I want to make that as clear as possible. Like that, it is. And again, people who like to want the tackles and stuff, I just want to say this because it's true. That position is bad and it needs help. Like it needs help. It really, really does. That position was way worse than the tackles last year. That's not even a debate in my opinion. The depth it wasn't very good last year. And again, obviously COVID hurt that. But it's true. That position was by far the weakest link on the offense. It's not even you don't even look at Tua when it comes to that kind of stuff. Yes, Tua had some issues, but to me, the weakest link on the offense was the skill positions. If you look at the games against Buffalo and some of those December games, we were hurting bad. Like Malcolm Perry was getting significant snaps the last month of the year. So we need playmakers on this team, bad. to me more than getting someone like Penei Sewell, because I do have faith that Robert Hunt and Austin Jackson are coming along. So let's move on. We'll go over this very quickly before we get into the trade. The Dolphins received 4 offers for the 3rd overall pick. It doesn't go into specifically who they were, but obviously there was a hot market. One of them was Carolina. They do go into that a little bit, but you can kind of see. Basically, the story is why the Niners gave up as much as they did, basically, because obviously a lot of teams wanted to get up to 3, and it came down to the Panthers and Niners. I know the Eagles were in there for a little while, and obviously we know what ended up happening. It's kind of more of a 49ers article than it is a Dolphins article, so I didn't want to go into that. And you know what? I feel like another thing I want to get into before we move on to the actual trade is kind of taking the temperature around the trade. It's like, can we get a little bit more credit? Because I do feel like this trade was, I think out of everybody the Eagles got a good haul, but it wasn't from this trade specifically. A lot of people attack on the Carson Wentz thing. Okay, they had a good offseason, but really looking at this trade, I just don't feel like the team got enough credit for what they did. I think it was one of the weirder trade sequences I've ever seen. And I think it will go down. And again, when you look at... And I just want to, quickly before we get into this trade, because I want to give some context to the history of this team. I think it was a great trade, and obviously the Dolphins have to just execute after this. But when you think about some of the great trades in the history of this franchise, or just when I say great trades, I don't mean they were great trades. I'm talking about let me put it this way: the most famous trades from the history of this franchise. Obviously, the best trade in the history of the franchise was obviously acquiring Don Shula from the Baltimore Colts. That was the best trade. That's undeniable. The Ricky Williams move, which I do believe was a trade. I could be misremembering that. Pretty sure that we did trade for Ricky Williams. That's obviously up there. I think obviously the worst trade in the history of the Dolphins was probably the Deion Jordan trade to get up and get him. That obviously didn't work out. I would love to see exact numbers on that. He's got to be one of the, in terms of trades, like that's got to be like the worst. One of the worst picks of ever has to be. I was looking this up. Who cares? I don't want to get into the specifics of that. Who cares about that? But I'm just saying, when you look at the great trades of this or the famous trades, and again, we traded up to 3 guys, if you remember that, with the Raiders, I believe, back in the day. That was in 2013. Time really does fly. That was obviously that was the second year of Joe Philbin. This is definitely one of the better ones, is basically what I'm saying. I think it's got to be 2 from it, like just like if you just like, okay, these first round picks, like, you know, the Ricky Williams trade would have worked out better if we had a better quarterback. I mean, that would have contended for 1. If somehow the Dolphins would have gotten Drew Brees or someone like that in that era with that team, and some of the defenses that we had, I mean, obviously history would be a lot different, but it wasn't. So even though we got Ricky Williams, I don't think that's, I think that could be topped, basically. So yeah, this is definitely, I'm very excited about this trade. So let's get into the trade itself. We talked about some of the historic trades. I don't believe, Paul Warfield was a trade, wasn't he? He might not have been. That might have been a free agent. Well, free agency didn't exist, but that might have been an acquisition. I don't know if that was a trade. Someone's gonna have to fact check me on that one. But if that's true, then I would probably say that's 2, and then I would say Ricky Williams is 3, and I think obviously 1 was, and I do believe Don Shula was a trade. Could be wrong about that too. I don't think I am. This is all off the top of my head. Trade. Now I'm Googling the Paul Warfield. If you're here for 20 minutes, if you've been here Yeah, he was traded. So yeah, so yeah, I would say Paul's probably 2. And I would say probably there's been actually some great trades in the history of this team. Like the Paul Warfield trade was brilliant. Obviously the Don Shula thing was probably the best thing Joe Robbie ever did. So okay, so I'm sorry guys. I apologize. I just Don Shula. Yeah, that was yes, Don Shula was a trade. Wanted to confirm that. I don't know why I was fuzzy on that. So yeah, if I did, and I do believe Ricky Williams was too. I don't know why this is a lot of history here that we're dealing with. But yeah, I think that would probably be the top 3. I would say Shula 1, 2 Warfield, 3 would probably be Ricky. If there's something else I'm forgetting, I probably am because I just remember the Paul Warfield thing. But anyway, the point is this team had a lot of trades that have affected its history. More than I thought. I was like, yeah, there have been a lot of trades. But anyway, I think this has a chance to go down. Probably. I mean, I don't think it will ever be 1, but it could be top 3 at least. It definitely could beat Ricky Williams. I don't know if it could beat Paul Warfield because that's 2 championships out of that. So, we'll see though. Anyway, let's get into this trade. Obviously, this trade, when it first happened, was very confused. I was very confused because when I found out about it, I read it all at the same time. Like, I didn't see the Niners trade first, then the Eagles trade. I just saw it all at the same time. So I thought it was like a 3-way deal, three-team deal, and it really wasn't. And that's what made it so confusing. But anyway, who cares about if I was confused or not? The point is, this is a great trade. Obviously, the Dolphins netted basically an extra first-round pick at the end of the day because they end up giving the Niners, third pick in 2022 to the Eagles to move up back to 6. They obviously are going to have 2 first-round picks in 2023. They had 2 this year. They're going to have 1 next year, which is amazing. And obviously, you look at they had 3 last year. It's crazy what Chris has been able to do. And, when you and what he's been able to take advantage of, if this goes down, first of all, if this ends up working, and all of these click, all these first round picks click, one of the best and most creative and interesting, they're going to do a 30 for 30 on it, moves by a GM in the history of the league, or any sports league for that matter. It's not only obviously a huge haul for one, when it all goes back to is one player basically, and Minkah Fitzpatrick, but it's unlike anything else I've ever seen really. It's in anything in sports really. Turning a Laramie Tunsil caliber player into that many picks is amazing. But they just have to execute now. It comes down to execution now, and hopefully they get the right guys. And they have a really, really good opportunity to do that in this draft in terms of getting special guys that are going to be Pro Bowlers. Like Devontae Smith and Jamar Chase they're going to be like, they have the opportunity to be all pros, but they definitely, I think at the very least, they're going to be Pro Bowlers. So you kind of just continue. They have when you start to think about it, they just have a great opportunity to continue to add on to all of it, and hopefully eventually that'll get a Super Bowl. I think that's what we're all hoping. But in my opinion, this is a fantastic trade. I loved it. I love it. I love what it does for the future. And like I said, it has the opportunity to be historic at the end of the day. It really, really does. And I hopefully we will, like 10 years from now, get that 30 for 30 or that sports documentary on how the Dolphins did it. Because it is, and again, at this point, it is a fantastic move. And not just the 49ers trade, but like everything else that this franchise has done to turn it around as fast as they did, to win 10 games last year. It's just amazing. And I think the thing that I take away from this trade more than anything is just how different and how exciting the future of this team is, and just a different. There's just a different vibe with the team than there has been in a long time, and I think you guys all understand what I'm saying when I say that. So it is a fantastic trade. It has endless amounts of possibilities when it comes to this trade, and again, just historic beyond belief, this trade, and how special it is what Chris did. And if Tua becomes a great player, people are going to look back at this and be like, wow, we might not ever see something like that again if he can execute it. And hopefully he does, and I think he will. So far, he's done pretty good. And this draft, I think, could really set apart the team. I think it has a very good opportunity to do that, to add special playmaking players on offense to go with the defense. At the very least, this team will be a playoff team. In my opinion, especially this year. And I think they could go even higher depending on what they do in the draft. But anyway, I could talk about this trade all day. It was a fantastic trade. To go from 3 to 12, then back 12 to 6, being that aggressive. And, that's something else I want to talk about is I think I would have been a little bit upset if they stayed at 12. Because, like I said in the past, it's cool to have all these picks, but at some point you have to take advantage of them. To have the third overall pick in a draft is pretty special. And sometimes you just got to cash the check in. And I would have been kind of upset if they got out of the top 10 and they didn't take advantage. Because, again, at the end of the day, to get Houston's pick and for it to be a top 3 pick in itself is pretty amazing. And you have to, I think, take advantage of that. And they still were able to do that when they moved back up to 6, and still gained something out of it at the end of the day, which I think is amazing. Really out of nothing. That's the crazy part. It wasn't like they gave up a Peyton Manning or anything like that. They really just kind of made it up out of thin air, which is the crazy part of the whole thing. So, again, like I said, I think my favorite part of it is the aggressiveness. And like I said, I think you eventually you have to cash in on your good faith. And I'm glad they went back up to 6 to do that. Because like I said, I think it would have been kind of stupid if they didn't take advantage of their position. And they did. They took advantage of it and even in a better way, especially since they're not taking a quarterback. All right. Let's move on to the fan Q&A, where we get an opportunity to see what you guys thought about all of the moves that happened. This first question comes from Crew to Boys Podcast. He says, what type of offense do you suspect the Dolphins to run with Tua and our new offensive coordinator? So the rumor is, which I'm glad that we actually got something out of this in terms of a little bit of a hint what they're going to end up doing, because we have no idea what Stuteville and Godsey are going to do, because obviously they haven't called plays in the past. But from what I've heard from the NFL News and NBC, if you watch that, it's going to be New England. It's going to be more like Chad O'Shea's offense, which I'm happy about. And I know some people might, and again, they might teach it differently. And obviously Eric isn't from that. And I think that's important. Obviously he comes from Denver. He was here before Brian. Obviously, was his name short? God, I'm drawing a blank on his name. You guys know what I'm talking about. The Titans coach, obviously. Former Titans coach. He's obviously from New England. So, he has New England background. So, I think the rumor is that it's going to be more New England-y than it was before. And again, obviously, I expect Godsey to be more of the pass game coordinator. And then, obviously, Eric to be more of the run game coordinator. So, I would say the passing game is going to be, at least from what we're hearing, is just the offense is going to be more along the lines of stuff that New England does, which actually gets me excited. I loved, and again, people know this. This is if you listen to the show, I was very upset when they let go O'Shea, because I thought what he did. I mean, the offense was top 10 in passing, okay, with that team. And granted, we were passing constantly because we couldn't run the football, but still, we could have still been a terrible passing team, but we weren't. We were one of the best statistically, one of the best in the league. We were top 10. So I was like, why would we do that? And I think it's good that we're going to go back to some of those New England roots a little bit. I like it. So, listen, a lot of that stuff is obviously speculation and rumor, and we'll obviously get a chance to see what it's actually going to be, but it's cool to hear that at least. This next question comes from SM. He said, Mike Gesicki going into a contract year might equal Pitts. Thoughts? No, I don't think that would. I don't think that would be on the mind of the organization. But I've thought about that a lot. I love the idea of those two being together for years to come. I think that would be really fun to watch. It's like, how physical can Pitts be? Because some people misunderstand. It's not just having two tight ends, like what New England did with Hernandez and Gronk. The difference between Hernandez and Gronk and maybe some like another all-star tight end tandem, which there haven't been that many in the history of the league, but they have to be able to block. That's what makes them so hard to guard. You can really do crazy stuff with personnel if you have two tight ends that are super good in the passing game, but are pretty good in the run game too. I don't know that Mike Gesicki and even really Kyle Pitts would be the greatest for that. So I kind of push back against that a little bit because obviously Mike isn't he is not a physical tight end whatsoever. I just don't think that would work the same. When you think about, Mike Gesicki, Kyle Pitts, it's like, it could be like Gronk and Hernandez and some of the great tight end. There haven't really been that great. Every time I say it, it's like, there's not been that many great tight end tandems. But something like that, that's really hard to stop. Obviously what New England did with Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry, we'll see how that works out. Both of those players have had, not Jonnu, but Hunter has definitely had some injury problems. But anyway, the point is like, you have to think about that stuff too. Like, I don't necessarily think it would work like that. And again, like I said, the thing you guys have to remember is what makes those two tight ends so hard to guard is that you can really hide and run the football really well with them, and then you play action and you got both of them on the field. You could spread the field out. You could start under center and then spread the field out in the shotgun. You could do so many things, but they have to be able to block. And I don't necessarily think that tandem would be that great at it. You could draft someone like that with 6 to then replace Mike, but I think that's kind of dumb. I think the Dolphins will go ahead and take a receiver there. And I've heard some speculation talking about Mike Gesicki getting replaced by Kyle Pitts. We've also heard some things that the Dolphins might end up trading Devontae Parker. I hope they don't do that. I hope they keep Devontae Parker if they draft Devontae Smith or Jamar Chase. I hope they keep him around because if you look at the depth, Will Fuller, I don't think we can just sit here and say, we're going to really count on Will to be healthy for 16 games. Obviously, Devontae doesn't have the greatest health either, but drafting someone and keeping him, at least the depth is there. Obviously, you have Preston Williams. You could bring back Allen Hurns' depth. You have Lynn Bowden. So I like excuse me. I think the Dolphins could still do it, and there's still a lot of talent. Like Preston Williams would really take over that Robin role a little bit more, but I'm a fan of keeping DP around at least one more season with those guys, and seeing how it plays out in training camp. All right, so let's move on to Julian. He says, what do you think the Dolphins' draft plans are now that we have a lot of weapons on offense to help Tua? Well, I definitely wouldn't say it's a lot. I still think receiver is a need, and I still think getting a playmaking player is a need. At least getting one in the first round, and I do think you should get one at 6. You guys, it's a need, but it also is I really like those. I really like Jamar Chase. I really like Devontae Smith. I think they're really, really good. And again, they fill a need. So that's why I'm so pro receiver at that position. This comes from Brian. He says, do you think there's a specific reason / plan behind stacking these picks, or are we simply just trying to draft as many top talented players as possible? Well, yeah, that's the point. I think what you're asking is, are they doing this to get Deshaun Watson? We heard something like that from people like Daniel Jeremiah and some people on NFL Network saying some stuff like that. But It could be. It could be for Deshaun Watson. And, some people have said it gives them a little bit of flexibility to stay in the race for a little bit longer, which is true. You could look at it like that way. But again, they could do both. They could cash in on those first round picks. In either way, they could use them to do either of those two things. So I think it's kind of both, because we don't know the real answer to it. But I would say both. This next question comes from SM. He says, Ryan Tannehill has thrown 55 touchdowns and 13 interceptions in the past 2 seasons. Did we get rid of him just to start over fresh? What was this a mistake? I don't think it was a mistake. It was time to move on. This is and some people are like, oh, I wonder what Dolphins fans think about it. They don't think that way. None of us do. I don't think. It was time to move on. That was a terrible, terrible season. The team needed some new, fresh blood in the organization. It was a dumpster fire, and that's keeping it tame, for God's sakes. I mean, it was bad. It was time to move on. It was time for both parties to move on from each other. And, I don't look at that and like, oh, I wish we still had him. I never have, and I don't think any other Fins fans do. Because of that. I mean, we had him for 7 seasons, or 6-7 seasons, and it just didn't work. So, I feel like we gave that, it's fair due. I mean, I don't know what else to say about that. I mean, we tried everything. And again, we just didn't hire the right people. And then obviously as soon as he leaves, we finally do, but that has nothing to do with Tannehill. It has more to do with, hey, we got Brian Flores and he's awesome. And, so I don't really care what Tannehill does. Doesn't matter to me. I don't like, oh, I wish we still had him. I don't think that. This next question comes from SM. He says, have you thought of posting questions to the viewers during the week after the podcast? I mean, people might enjoy the extra interaction. Have you thought of posting questions to the viewers during the week after the podcast? You talking about just like interacting I could do more of that. I think you're right. I think I could do more of that. It says, thanks for the work you do. I appreciate it. He says, SM, have you noticed, this question comes from SM. He says, have you noticed at all of the free agents we bring in under 30? It's been that way last season too. I like the concept. Yeah, I like it too. It's good. This next question comes from SM. He says, what position on defense would you draft? I would draft an outside linebacker. And if there's a middle linebacker that I really like, I would probably lean a little bit towards that. But I would say probably the thing that I would look for is a versatile free safety and an outside linebacker. This next question comes from, and I love Brandon, and I think he had an underrated rookie year. And I'm excited to see where he goes. But I would still look at some of the defensive backs in this draft. This next question comes from Crude Boys Podcast. He says, who on the current roster will finish his career as a Dolphin? I mean, almost no one finishes their career with one team now. Like, it's almost impossible. And especially with this organization, like, I have a hard time believing that's even possible, to be honest with you. But if I had to say, and when I say this organization, I mean how Brian runs things and Chris. Like, Tom Brady didn't finish his career with Bill Belichick. Like, it's almost impossible to finish your career with the way that they think about football. So, it's definitely going to be a hard player to pick there. I would say Tua has the best opportunity to. So I would probably say Tua. Because if he becomes what we hope he becomes, it's just so hard to replace a quarterback. So I would say Tua. This next question comes, and I'm not saying that just to say it. I mean, honest to God, like it would be very hard for other players to do that with the way, like I said, that Bill and Brian and just like the whole like pass with those guys, the way that they run, they get rid of players before their prime is up. I mean, that's just what they do. This next question comes from Armando. He says, hi, Skaggs, love your podcast. Do you think that Albert Wilson will be back with the Dolphins? No, probably not. It would be very hard for him to make the team. If he shows up, like, there's a chance he can, but if I had to guess, probably not. If you look at they're carrying 12 right now. They're carrying, I believe, 12. They re-signed Mack. And granted, that was really for special teams. And I'm talking about Mac Hollins. So, it's just going to be, there's a lot of guys there. And not to mention the fact that they're going to probably draft one. So, it would just be very, very difficult for him to do it. This next question comes from Crude Boys Podcast. He says, who's the best plug-and-play prospect in this year's draft? I would say the receivers. I think those two guys would make a huge impact day one. So I would say Devontae Smith and Jamar Chase. I like Caleb Farley a lot. I think he could easily come in somewhere and be great. Who else could do it? So I think the tackles probably could too. But if I had to say the best, I think those guys, the two receivers, I think are going to make the biggest impact year one. This next question comes from Mark. He says, so what do you think of the moves we made Friday? Do you think we get enough or a steal? Hold on, I gotta get closer. He said this question comes from Mark. He says, I swear I just read that question without saying who it was from. I'm out of my mind. That last question came from Crude Boys Podcast. This question comes from Mark Jefferson. He says, so what do you think of the moves we made Friday? Do you think we got enough or a steal? Will we get a wide receiver or pass catcher? Who will it be? If not, other positions at 6. Would you address? What position do you think the team will address if it's not a pass catcher? Sorry for. Okay. So okay, did I like the moves? Yes, I loved them. Do you think we got enough? Yes, I think it was a steal. I think we got enough. For sure, definitely got enough. I think we probably honestly got too much at the end of the day. Because we still got a first round pick and we got back up to 6. Will we get a wide receiver or pass catcher? Who will it be? I think it probably will be Devontae Smith if I had to guess. If not, what other positions other than receiver at 6? I would probably say I really like Caleb Farley. I think if I had to say another position, I like him a lot. I think he's going to be really good. What position? And again, that's not because I do watch the Chris Sims podcast. But if you actually watch Caleb Farley, he is very good. And I know he took a year off, all that. But anyway, the point is that's my own opinion. I really like Caleb. What position do you think the team will address if it's not a pass catcher? Or we? If it's not a pass catcher, I would say if I had to think of what Chris Greer would do, I would probably say maybe a tackle. Yeah. I don't think Micah Parsons is going to go there. And Caleb Farley, it could be him. He's talented enough to go there. This question comes from Beef. He says, hey, Skaggs, I don't know if you already said this previously, but I want to mention in the interest of some fans have for Penei Sewell, as good of a prospect as he is, he opted out this season and didn't play. Did you consider that a red flag? No. I mean, nobody considers that with Jamar Chase, so I wouldn't say that's a red flag. So I would say just because Penei Sewell took a year off, it's not a red flag to answer your question, Beef. This next question comes from Northeast. He says, what are the odds Denver and or Carolina tried to trade for the 6th pick to get a quarterback? What are the odds that Denver and or Carolina tried to trade for the 6th pick to get a quarterback that would extend the run on quarterbacks and make it even more likely that one of the top playmakers would still be there at the respective pick we ended up with? It would have to be a first-round pick, though. I'm going to be honest with you. To answer your question, that question came from Northeast. So to answer your question, Northeast, it would have to be a first-round pick for me to move down again. Again, at some point, you have to cash in on your goodwill. This next question comes from SM. He says, Javonte Williams, 5'10", 220. Are you familiar? Yes, I am familiar with his work. He reminds me. There's a little bit of Maurice Jones-Drew in there, or maybe a little bit more of C.J. Anderson, that type of a running back. So I think that's probably my pro comps for him. C.J. Anderson, MJD. This next question comes from, or maybe someone like Jonathan Stewart. This next question comes from KC Fanatic. He says, do we take Penei at 6, Sewell at 6? Many mock drafts say quarterback, and no, definitely not a quarterback. I don't know. I hope not. I hope it's a receiver or a tight end. This next question comes from Ethan. He says, do you think the Dolphins should have stayed at 12. I think they should have. Now the number 6 pick is costing 2 first-round picks, and one of either Smith/Pitts/Chase Waddle are very likely to be there at 12. No, it's not 2 first-round picks, first of all. They didn't lose anything at the end of the day. They gained a first-round pick, so they didn't lose anything. So I wouldn't say that it cost them that, because they didn't lose anything at the end of the day. Maybe if the Dolphins do well next year, then you can't even argue that they have the Niners pick. Well, so I don't like that argument. I've heard that argument before. I'm like, to me, that's stupid. You trade down to 6 and you still get a first round pick. Who cares? How many first round picks do you really need at the end of the day, especially if and again, maybe the team feels that and again, I feel this way. I think at the very least they're going to be a playoff team. So, would you rather have another pick from 18 to 20 next year, or would you rather have a top 10 pick this year and an 18 pick this year? I would take the top 10 pick this year, and the 18th pick this year over. And again, you could say, well, you wouldn't have had both. You wouldn't have had a top 10 pick this year. So I guess you can't say that. So I would have taken the top 10 pick this year. No doubt about it. So I disagree with that. So, Ethan, I disagree with you. I don't mean to sound hostile, because it's a good question to ask. I just disagree with it. And I don't think that you would have gotten Jamar Chase or Devontae Smith. And I think there's a huge gap between those players. Who would I rather have, Devontae or Chase or Waddle? It's not even close. I would rather have Jamar Chase and Devontae Smith. So I don't think that they would have been there at 12. For sure. I mean, the Eagles are at 6. They could take a quarterback. But again, this goes back to who the heck knows what everybody's thinking. You don't know. How do you know Denver won't take a receiver if they fall in love with one? For Drew Lock, you don't know. And I know they've invested in that before, but they could. There's nothing stopping them from doing that. So I think it just secures a great player for the Dolphins, and who's against that at the end of the day? The 6th question comes from Beef. He says, hey Skaggs, the NFL draft being literally a month away. And he says, oh, how time flies. It's true. It's crazy. Besides Flores and Greer looking for the best players in free agency in the draft, do you think Reggie McKenzie is helping out with the scouting too, even though he's in the front offense? Yeah, obviously he's helping out the organization and stuff, which is great. So yeah, his input is awesome, because he's obviously had a lot of success in the past. And the funny thing is he's had a lot of success with some trades in the past, obviously, and getting great players as well. The 6th question comes from MC. He says, hey Skaggs, I wanted to know, does it seem like the coaching staff is trying to make the defense even better to help to take some pressure off Tua in his true rookie season coming next with all the defensive moves and acquisitions they made? No, I just think they value that side of obviously Brian comes from that, where defense was the backbone of New England for such a long time. So I think that has a huge effect on it. And again, I wouldn't consider. I think that 1000% last year was Tua. And again, I know he didn't have a normal offseason, but I think Tua's past all the rookie stuff. I don't think you have to worry about that. This next question comes from KC Fanatic. He says, hey Skaggs, love the show. I look forward to it. Appreciate that. He says, our biggest needs are, I say, running back and center. I could see that. Yeah, but maybe at 18. I would say that's our biggest needs, for sure. I think you can address that at 18. This next question comes from SM. He says, if Jacoby Brissett outperforms Tua in camp / preseason, does he start? If it's... yeah, I would say if that Brian is any... I think he would, but I don't think he will. Let's see here. This next question comes from Ahmed, who asks a long question. Hopefully we can fit this in here. He says, do you think the plan all along was to trade the 3rd pick during Zach Wilson's pro day? Probably not. I would say no. Apparently they had these conversations for at least a week before that. So obviously that was a long time in the making. He says, what do you think about the idea of loving a player enough to trade up for them, rather than keep the future first-round picks and continue building depth with quality players? Again, many of the team's moves don't pan out, and that is well known. If the 6th pick is a bust, or Pitts/Chase or O.J. Howard's in this draft, that is multiple picks of quality mid-round depth lost, especially if Miami collected a future first-round pick to package as Tua insurance. I mean, they still can do that. They still have enough first-round picks to do that. So they don't have to, I wouldn't worry about that. First of all, Jamar Chase, Devontae Smith, Kyle Pitts, I guess you can make an argument with the whole O.J. Howard comparison, but especially O.J. Howard coming out of college, Smith and Chase are way better players than him coming out. Like, that's not even close. So, I don't think those are good comparisons, and I don't think they will be bust, but that's the draft, okay? It's different opinions. Who knows? They could still, obviously they could be, but I don't think they will be. Then he says, thoughts on not trading for Deshaun Watson and his future in the league in cancel culture society? Yes, long post. Maybe I should split it up into 10 small posts like SM does, LOL. That's pretty funny. I like that. He says, no, it's fine. It's fine. I was just worried that I was going to talk too long. But anyway, thoughts on not trading for Deshaun Watson and his future in the league in cancel culture society? That's a touchy one. I don't know. I mean, if someone is obviously guilty of those crimes, it's not obviously that person deserves to be punished for them, clearly. And I think everybody can agree on that. It's a very punishable, it should be, you should be held accountable for that, obviously. You can't just get away with something like that, and even get rewarded for it, for that matter. So, that, to me, again, I think we just all have to wait for that to be resolved. Obviously, he hasn't been proven guilty yet, innocently proven guilty, but, I mean, obviously this stuff is mounting up against him. We all just going to have to see the end result. And then, obviously, I think whatever his future is will be resolved. This next question comes from SM. He says, forgetting which way we get there, give me Skaggs' ideal starters at wide receiver and running back. Could you include players in this draft? Can you include? Yes, my ideal starters. It's easy, and I've said this many times. Ideally, you get Jamar Chase and Najee Harris, or Devontae Smith and Najee Harris. Don't really care what the combination is. That would be my ideal receiver running back duo. This next question comes from JagPack18. He says, so they traded back up to 6, so there's clearly somebody they really want. That they thought won't be there at 12. Who do you think they want at 6? Who does Skaggs want at 6? I want either Jamar Chase or Devontae Smith. I hope that that's what they want. And I think those players are better than what you guys are giving them credit for. And I think you underestimate the value of a great player when it comes to people just picking great players. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. Richard and Beef. We'll see if we can't. Richard and Beef asked questions that we couldn't get to, but I appreciate it nonetheless. And yeah, that's it, ladies and gentlemen. The time has run out. The time is gone. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed it. Obviously, always enjoy making these, and I'll see you guys in the next one.